Hey, so I'm going to quickly walk through how I'm building out a workflow for preparing to answer Dear Ben questions. I'm using Claude Code and I'm using Every skill builder. So this is taking a flow that I already have been doing myself manually. Let me pull up this document first, basically looking to help automate some of the activities that I've been doing in advance of recording a Dear Ben episode. Pull this up over here. You can see that I basically outlined what's my ideal workflow, which I based off of what I've already been doing myself by hand. And then I used ChatGPT's AI optimizer or prompt optimizer, which I'll pull up right here. It's actually, I keep it as a bookmark on my computer for when I log in. And what it does is I can put in a prompt or a bunch of thoughts. And what it will do is OpenAI has this tool that will reorganize and add additional context as well as notes to improve a prompt for an LLM. Now, one thing to keep in mind is, so if you can see if you choose optimize for which LLM, I mean, and this is specific to ChatGPT. I actually use this, in this case, obviously I'm using this with Claude Code. I don't know to what extent that matters, honestly. I think what I know anecdotally from having used this over the last several months is that it genuinely improves the efficacy of Claude or ChatGPT following a prompt. And so I've just gotten to a habit of, especially when I have a relatively complex system or workflow, what I'll do is I'll talk it out. The text will go in here and then it will tidy up what I wrote. And then I can copy that and make some additional manual changes and then use it with whatever the LLM is. So in this case, I'm using Every's create skill. Let's see here, create skill agent skill. It's kind of meta within Claude Code. It comes with the marketplace. I found it's really helpful. And so what I ended up doing was I took the prompt that I got back from ChatGPT, the optimized one. I invoked the create agent skill. I pasted in the workflow that I want to accomplish. And then you can see it's now going through and basically building a skill for me. And you can see it's broken up into 4 phases, including a skill.md file. One thing to keep in mind is what I ultimately created here was an agent workflow to help me put together a general basic script for when I record a Dear Ben episode. And I have an entire context file that I use where it talks about what's the goal of Dear Ben. I give some examples of past writing of mine to help me put together, walk me through, and help me collect all of my thoughts so that I've thought through what I'm going to say and work backwards from what do I believe and what's the output that I want to walk through. And is there any pre-work that I want to do ahead of doing a live screen share? And so you can see right here where it is giving me an outline around what is, for this part of the workflow, it's broken up into ideation and context, content development and proof of concept, and then blind spots. Those are the different areas that I said were a part of the workflow of helping me prepare to record an episode. The original prompt that I gave it, it's adding in a bunch of additional context. And this is all being done through Every's own agent skill workflow builder that they have. And so you will see how well this works. I'm going to try this out on the next episode. So this is not specifically a Dear Ben episode right now that I'm recording. It's more of a behind the scenes around how I go about approaching and trying to create systems with a lot of things that I'm doing repeatedly. And obviously I have no idea how well this will work, but in general, I think it will work. I'm sure I'll have to tweak it, but it'll probably be a decent first version. And then based off of what comes out of it, I'm sure I'll make some additional adjustments. One cool thing is that Every has another skill called edit skill. So some of the changes I make will probably be manually done within the files, but I can also, if I have a more dramatic adjustment, or if I'm looking for thoughts around how to maybe have a dramatically different output, what I would do is try using Every's edit skill workflow and see what it will do to try to accomplish my changes directly on the files. So let's see here. but you can see that it's going through. And now the next thing I'll do is blind spots, which is one thing I always think about is what are the sort of questions or the context that I don't have from the question that someone asked me that I should think about. So around blind spots, identify unknowns and assumptions that need resolution, distinguish between questions you can answer internally versus questions that maybe require me sending a follow-up email to the person who submitted the question so we can make sure I have enough context to properly answer it. And so when all this is done, I'll be able to manually, using a / command within Claude, essentially I'll paste in the person's submission as well as any of my own notes. And then the agent will go through and ask me a series of questions to get personal anecdotes and help me sort of refine my thinking around how would I approach this and help me sort of solidify and compress into a 2 to 10 minute episode, a working functional proof of concept that has already had a fair amount of thinking that's gone on to it ahead of recording. And so here it's just giving me an overview of how it works. It showed that there's 4 different phases. And let's say I've already figured out or I'm very confident about the first phase around context or the angle I want to take. This is saying that I can actually invoke a later phase if I've already figured out another phase. So I don't always have to start at the very beginning at phase 1. I can start at phase 2 or phase 3, etc. So this is pretty neat. I'm excited to try it out. See how well it works. So this is funny and a good example of AI being probabilistic, not deterministic. So it went through, it made the skill in the workflow, and but it didn't actually create a / command for me to actually trigger the workflow. And so I ended up having to ask it, how do I invoke this workflow if you didn't create a Claude command that corresponds with it? And it's like, good catch. Create a skill with no command to invoke it. So now it basically looked at my existing command and use that as a frame of reference. And it now has generated a / command that will trigger this whole process. So I'll do live to see how well this works. We'll see if we use this. Before we do that, I'm going to walk through and just review the / command it made. So my screen is, I'll zoom in a little bit. So here's the episode production command. That's what I called it. It's fine. It is guiding me in the production of creating an episode, where the first it will invoke the episode production skill. So this is where it's referencing the Claude skill that we just made that it will use for this piece. Process the inputs, follow the appropriate work phase. And by the inputs, you can see right here as an argument hint, which means that when I invoke this workflow, I'll include with it a bunch of text. In this case, it'll be probably the submission of the person. And I've already provided additional context and cleaned up what their submission is. Then it outlines what the different phases are of the plannings, what I want the outputs to be, what the outcoming goals are for each one, and then where to save the assets. So it saves it within episodes research, which already exists. And you can see I already have deliverables, ideation. So I'm going to make one modification. There's one modification I'd like to make because there's a lot of files that we're going to be generating. I'd like for them to be incremental, or there should be a prefix indicating in what sequence should I read any of the files that get generated. The very last item should be the marketing deliverability file, which our other skill generates. So I'd like for you to modify the skill to just have a prefix starting at what's the sequence of files that I should be reading. So this should go in and modify the skill. There we go. So it's going to update the skill that we just made, and then it should also update. Yeah, it also updated the instructions of the other skill. Also, all file paths should be relative, not absolute to my hard drive. Okay, we'll see how this works. Okay, so I just copied the message of the submission. Now I'll do the / command generate. So what is this called? Episode production. I might need to restart. All right, make this restart Claude for it to detect. Let me just check to see who submitted this one. All right, so let's see. So now we'll be able to see as the command's running, it's showing when is it referencing the skill, and then what phases it's going through. Okay, so now it's asking me the questions that I had asked it to prompt me. So I'm just going to ignore the video for a bit and just answer this, and I'll probably cut out a lot of this and give a summary around what did I do. My gut reaction is, are there existing tools, AI tools that will just do this out of the box? I'm not sure that this is something, I'm sure there's some combination of tools. I'm not sure if there's a very specific tool that should do this. My gut is you could probably do this with Lindy AI again, but I'm sure there might also be some existing off-the-shelf tools around knowledge bases that would be sufficient. The next thought is, where does he want or expect his team to submit requests for documents? One thought would be to do it in Slack directly to the bot. Another one would be to create a microsite where you can submit your question and it will basically resurface the documents in the chat or on the site that are relevant to the team members' requests. I think, especially if someone's asking for things and maybe they want to know historically what they used before for reference, I might do it within Slack. Otherwise, you end up creating chat history, one of the open source tools to create your own ChatGPT-like wrapper, but based off of the question he's asking, they don't seem technical. They are software developers, but maybe it'd be better if you could just use Lindy or something similar. I think the next question, and we can ignore the fact that they might want or need a reference to historical questions. First, we want to know is, does this do the job? Then if it does the job, then we can work backwards from what would be the best way for someone to be able to resurface past things they were looking for or past materials. My assumption is it's not important for other people to know what questions others asked and what the materials were that were surfaced. My guess is that a person would want this because presumably everyone has access to the Google Drive. So then it's a question of describing what are you looking for, or the type of meeting it is. And maybe it's a combination of the CEO can give rules around or someone on the team can basically say, here are the typical documents we need at various stages of the sales funnel for different types of meetings. I think having the actual sales and marketing material self-index is probably not necessary because there's a lot of tools that will do stuff around knowledge bases, even Intercom, Spin. I think the next question is, would that work out of the box? And if not, what is it about it? And is it the same documents over and over again, or is it a bit more nuanced? And how many documents are we talking about? Is it 50, 100? I can't imagine it's more than that. But my guess, the most flexible way to do this, assuming that he doesn't want to go out and build a bespoke tool, would be to use Lindy or N8N. My inclination would be Lindy because at least Lindy also has a chat function, and you could also embed Lindy on a site if you want your team to be able to just visit a page and ask. Common pitfalls, I think, are reinventing the wheel and trying to build something bespoke when something off the shelf would work, and not trying to get too fancy with what are you trying to build versus really focusing on what do you actually need, what are the use cases that come up over and over again, and not building too much for hypothetical scenarios. I haven't really. I've always done sales myself. I've generally known where the documents are, and there've never been so many. The bigger thing I've always needed to do is I've used Firefly as to be able to find things that I said in past meetings. So I've mostly used AI to help resurface past conversations that I had to figure out how did I describe that or what did I say to someone. And using an MCP for something like that has been really helpful as opposed to just going into any sort of tool, whether it's Fireflies or Grain or Circle Back and just searching. It's much easier to say what you're looking for to an MCP and then have them find what you said. And it's important, though, I think, that it's an MCP Fireflies versus some of these recorders that has a true MCP, not one that's just wrapping an API, because I find that, at least in my experience, Fireflies is using their own AI search. It's semantic as opposed to literal search. That's getting beyond the scope of what we're talking about here, though. What else? Yeah, I think T-Draft proposes check. Let me see what he said around that. Drafting a proposal, I would have that as a separate task or agent, right? I don't think necessarily he's thinking of having it all be the same thing, but I would separate these out into separate jobs in the same way that for DearBen, I have one workflow for preparing for an episode. And then once I've recorded an episode, I have a completely different workflow for taking what ultimately I recorded and then extracting sound bites and helping me describe what was said and what the key points were from a content repurposing perspective. I would break those out rather than trying to have one big standalone one. And I would first start with the discoverability. And then once you start doing proposals, I would maybe do this on the fly as you're trying to draft an actual proposal. You also need some very real good examples of good proposals that it can use as a reference. 5. Yeah. So, and then the next question from the AI was, why would a CEO prioritize this over just better folder organization? And only he can answer that. I can't. My guess is maybe some of it is there's a bunch of different files, and maybe he wants to make it super easy for someone to find multiple files that are relevant. But my guess is that it means that he probably has enough files that it's not as simple as just a couple files and someone knows where to go. But that's a fair question. And that's one that when I send the episode to the CEO, I will mention that as one of the thoughts is, could this be solved just through better folder organization? All right, so now we'll run that. So now what we can see is it's now researching the problem space. I think one of the neat things about using AI, especially when thinking about and brainstorming stuff like this, is it helps me think more expansively than just what's my immediate reaction. And then it often asks, not all the questions are good, but often enough it'll ask me some questions that really get me thinking and force me to question my assumptions. Another question issue is that we don't have any context around is budget and how technical their team is. Question, gut reaction questions, research problem space. Yeah, there's a Google Drive sync, which I knew. Embedded chat, 24-hour refresh. So yeah, Lindy off the shelf would probably work. Dashwork, Get Guru. I've heard of these guys. Obviously, it's not specific to sales. And there's some tools that I think out of the box that work with Notion databases, but since this content's already in Google Drive, part of what I wonder is if he has them saved. Did he save it as PDFs? Let me see what he said to me. They're saved as Google Docs. I'd actually push back and see if it's actually a file structure problem. How many files are we talking about? And if it's because there's so many files that it goes down one route, but if it's because maybe folder structure would solve it. So is this really a problem for AI, or is this a problem around organizing your documents? How complicated and how discrete? Is there a bunch of documents that are similar but not? And so it really needs to find the right one without me having dealt with this problem myself. Hard to know. But this goes with what my original instinct was, which was using Lindy with the Google Drive and Slack. So you can see that it's now analyzing Lindy's docs around knowledge bases. And I do know that's one of the use cases that Lindy themselves even advertises is knowledge bases. This is not unique to Lindy per se, right? But I do think that in general, it's helpful to consolidate all of your automations in a single tool, whether it's N8N or Lindy. And Lindy, as I did, I think in the previous episode, is a really good sort of middle of the road tool where you can build stuff really quickly. And know what we can actually do is we could probably go into Lindy, give it this use case and workflow, and it'll build out the workflow. Auto syncs every 24 hours. For single docs, I recommend using direct action instead of knowledge base. Yeah. All right, so this is cool. It actually found a couple of reviews of someone else. I've used Lindy a fair amount, so it was written in July. Curious to see what this says. Yeah. Template library, and there might even be a template library for knowledge base. I'm sure they have some, I'm sure they do. I just wondered what it's going to work for this. Complex. My ultimate content system. Yeah, I think the monthly credit thing is a double-edged sword where Lindy is not the cheapest. I think you get a good bang for your buck in general. You're not building up proof of concepts and stuff, and you're not doing tons and tons off burning tons and tons of tokens. And I know that they have some guides around how to optimize your workflows so that you're optimizing or minimizing the number of tokens that you're consuming, which, especially if you're invoking some of the new workflows regularly, that could probably, again, depending on how big these documents are and how much of the document that Lindy has to read, that would probably be one of the more expensive, from a token perspective, one of the more expensive aspects of this are these really long documents, because for an LLM to analyze it every time, if you're using an intermediary Lindy, it might not be, you know, but if this is something that's generating you revenue for your business, a part of sales, my guess is that it'd be hard to argue that you're not going to make more money for your business by compressing time, and because you're paying folks to be finding documents regardless. And so there's, again, without having more context, very easy, certainly in the sales role, for you to justify whatever the cost is. It's probably cheaper than the humans that you're paying to have looking for these documents. Probably also makes onboarding easier in certain aspects. Although again, I wonder how complicated it actually is. Credit consumption so really this person's criticism understandably comes down to credit consumption, which, go back to, just optimize your consumption. Then also you can choose which LLMs you're using. Are you using Claude Haiku versus Sonnet, etc., or even outside of Claude using Gemini or ChatGPT. So that makes sense. All right, let me read through your sales team can't find the case I need. 10, let you know of it, Credits burn fast. Okay, so I'm not even sure. I doubt this is true, the 24-hour sync delay. I'm just gonna say. And I think one consideration is the length of the documents, because that's probably going to be one of the more expensive things. If these are long documents, that will have an impact on the number of tokens it consumes. But also, Lindy has some new help guides around how to optimize your workflows to reduce the consumption of tokens, including choosing which LLM you're using. So I could even experiment with some of the smaller LLMs. So you probably don't need a powerful LLM that takes up a lot of tokens. You could probably accomplish a lot of this using some of the smaller, fast models. Yeah. So then the next step will be either recording on the fly, or more likely I'll do a quick test myself and just verify how this works and come up with some documents that I've used in the past just to show that it works on the fly. And so again, keep in mind, I built out this workflow, provided it with prompts around the structure. And so the LLM is just following my process. And this for me is more just a frame of reference before I record, just to make sure I've sort of thought it through and consider different angles. So the next one, proof of concept and script. Create a message for me to give to the Lindy agent workflow builder so that we can give a descriptive explanation of what we're trying to accomplish within Lindy, and then Lindy's LLM can try to build the workflow for us. Let's see about that. Now, could I have figured all this out myself? Yeah, sure. And a lot of this, I don't need an explanation of how to do it. This is more just giving, it does eliminate some of the thinking that has to go into this, which enables me to think about the more interesting and complicated parts of this, and then multiply this across all the questions that are being submitted. Definitely helpful, certainly around streamlining it, to make sure that I am able to arrive and really use a lot of my effort and thought around the creative problem-solving piece, then the sort of basic, it really is a brainstorming tool for me at this point. Build a sales collateral finder for my software team. So if I go in, I'll record myself using this.